should be recording. Okay. Excellent. Okay. Right. It's 10:32. Well, I'll monitor the lobby. Delighted to have Margaret Snowdon on this morning. Welcome, everybody, to this morning's Playpen in conversation with Margaret Snowdon. Before I start, some of you may have heard that Henry Tapper collapsed yesterday and has been rushed to hospital. I have very, very little information about what that entails, what's wrong with him, etc., etc. But our thoughts and prayers go out to his family, and Pension Playpen. I'm sure all of us will wish him a speedy recovery. If I hear any more, then I'll maybe put a note out. But at the moment, it's all very early days, and I don't know. So, if we can think about Henry and pray for Henry, that'd be great. So, wish him a speedy recovery. Today's Playpen in conversation with Margaret. Margaret, thank you very much in advance for your time this morning. I know you're mega busy. We're all mega busy. Lots to talk about. Quite a big agenda. As usual, this is an informal Teams meeting, and we'd be delighted if anybody wants to chip in with questions or any points or any statements, or if you want to go in the chat room and put any links to any websites, that would be great. We will be delighted for and your input, and we like to have it interactive. So we are recording. JQ, William, Margaret, we're just thumbs up for recording, which is great. And we'll put the video up on the website later on today. And we do have a podcast now, Margaret. So when you're in the gym at doing all that exercise, then you'll be able to listen to yourself on a podcast. So there you go.
Brilliant.
So there we are. So I'm going to assume that everybody knows who you are. I think probably most people know who you are. Maybe you want to spend 30 seconds or a minute just summarising who you are, just in case, number one. And then number two, we'll move on to the main agenda. When our first item, we'll talk about sort of a pension scamming, but it might be an idea just to introduce yourself formally, I guess, if that's all right.
Yeah, no problem. I know most of the, well, I think I know everybody on the call actually, but yeah, Margaret Snowdon, general interviewing person in pensions. I have a couple of non-exec roles, and also I deal with a number of voluntary things within the industry, and keep myself busy. Been in pensions for about 45 years or something. So beginning to think of retirement. No, I'm not really, but yeah, I think that's me. Just keep plodding on.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Brilliant. So if we just jump straight in, then, I mean, obviously, you have been involved very, very closely with. First of all, let's talk about sort of pension scamming and an update with your involvement with pension scamming, the impact on the market. I think the first part of this is your involvement and obviously the development of PSIG, and then maybe we need to move on to what your opinion is regarding what's happening with the regulator, because I know there's a lot of stuff going on there. But if we start with your side of it first, and then maybe move on to what's happening on scamming.
Yeah, well, scamming still exists,
Oh, dash it!
I know, despite various efforts to eliminate it, and I suppose also some stats that like to pretend it's not as bad as it is. It's still there, and it's still painful for people who are scammed, and it's also painful for society. So it is something we need to do what we can to stop. Pensions is very complicated, and I think the complication means that people are more easily bamboozled about what you can do, what you can't do. And pensions has been in the news for such a long time now that people with sort of less scruples are quite happy to take advantage of that and go for the money, because that's where it is. But I mean, the honest truth is we don't really know how extensive scamming is. I mean, there was a report from Action Fraud for last year saying that there was £17.7 million scammed in 2023. Now, if you don't count the scams then you're not going to get a very high figure. So I think 17.7 million is a real underestimate of how much has been lost. But we also aren't terribly sure what a scam is and what a scam hasn't, what a scam isn't. And I think anything that causes loss of savings for people is a bad thing, and we need to do stuff to try and sort it. But we're not very good at collecting stats, and we're actually not very good, and I mean centrally, we're not very good at exploring what that means and then communicating with people, and then importantly, taking action.
Can I ask a question, Margaret, on that? Sorry to interrupt. In that analysis, and I suppose it's down to us as an industry, but is it sort of 50-50 between occupational schemes and, obviously governed by trustees, and contract-based schemes or individual SIPs? Is there a marked sort of 50-50 that, 8 million, 9 million is personal pension SIP or GPP, and the other 8 million is occupational? Do we have, as an industry, have any feel as to, or is it 90% occupational, 10% SIP? Have we any feel for that?
Yeah, no, we don't actually, which is part of the weakness on MI. But anecdotally, we think there's more in the contract side than in the occupational side, and that's probably because there's been a lot of activity by trustees to try and stop scamming and try and warn people, and that's been quite a tough gig, because while you try to warn people, you're delaying the transfer, if it's a transfer that's the root cause of it rather than a switch. But it's just so difficult to get a handle on it. But what we can see anecdotally, and a lot of it coming through our industry forum where we talk about scams, a lot of it seems to be on the SaaS side, and there's still quite a bit of overseas players. And we've had a recent change to try and make it harder for overseas transfers to happen, and I think that's probably good. But we need to make sure we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, because there are sometimes valid reasons for transferring overseas. But the government has actually been making a lot more noise now on scams. They've suddenly created a sort of commissioner, but it's really about COVID scamming and COVID loans, etc., being falsely claimed. So they're cracking down, or they look as if they're going to be cracking down quite hard on any fraud against the government. And that's their priority, and I think that's kind of obvious when you look at the state of the economy. They've got to get money from somewhere. But what they sort of continually fail to do is deliver help to the pensions industry itself, to try and combat scams. And by that I mean taking out bad players, taking out bad actors. It's rather depressing when you see the same names coming up time and time again, as people who are sort of not quite proven but suspected of being scammers, and because you can't prove it, there isn't any real pressure to change it. So, but we're not just dealing with transfer scams. There's quite a bit more on the investment side, where people invest in the wrong things, and they're encouraged to do that by sort of less scrupulous advisors. But we've also got quite an increase in cyber and internal fraud and ID fraud. So the horizon is broadening for scamming activity, and we are going to have to do, I think, a lot more. And the thing we're beginning to see starting as well is drawdown scams, where people are encouraged to draw down their pensions. And, I know there was a great big rush on drawdown and getting cash out because of the rumours on whether the government was going to, ban tax-free cash. So there was a big, influx of activity, and I do worry that some of that might end up transferring money from pension schemes where it was relatively safe into dodgy investments, because people will have to put that money somewhere, more than likely. So the short answer is yes, scams are still there. What is TPR doing about it? Well, TPR has a cross agency group, the Pension Scams Action Group, and they've been trying for quite some time. Used to be known as Project Bloom. They've been trying for some time to get a handle on scams and try and bring all parties together to help to stop scams, and also to do something at the other end where scams have happened. And they mean well. They have great intentions, but the problem is, frankly, it's too much of a talking shop. We talk about all the good that could be done, but then don't particularly do it. But having said that, we are getting a slightly better handle on the scale of the problem generally, and there's a bit more willingness within TPR to understand the enforcement side and actually do something about enforcement, and I think that's great. I know they're swapping resources with the National Economic Crime Centre, and that's to try and get expertise into the NECC, but also to get knowledge and skills back into TPR. So it's a bit of a slow burn, but I think it shows intention, and we really need to, because the amount of money at stake, makes the black hole in the economy look like pocket change. So we really need to change our attitude around scams.
So as part of that, the regulator has got new powers to have teeth. I mean, maybe it's a simplified approach, but do they actually have teeth now, or not?
No, they don't have any more teeth. I mean, they actually do have teeth already. They just don't use them. And I mean, it's similar to other organisations. They tend to not do what they could do very quickly, and it's because they like to go belt and braces. The bar for proof is quite high. It's quite expensive to take cases to try and raise prosecutions. So there isn't a lot happens, but what I think we need is more dedicated resources to doing this. And yes, that costs money, but it could be paid for if we had a zero tolerance of scamming and fraud, and actually went after the assets of scammers. Now, we have the powers to do that already.
Okay.
The NCA could seize assets on suspicious activities, but they don't tend to do it. And the sad truth is that if you're a scammer operating in the UK, you've only got a 1 in 3,000 chance of being caught. So we need zero tolerance, and we need to resource to be able to go after the money, basically, because that's what it's all about.
Yeah, Padraig, you got your hand up. Do you want to ask Margaret a question or make a point, Padraig?
Yes, please. Margaret, hiya. Why has the regulator not learnt its lesson? Because belt and braces has been the approach, apparently, for dashboards. Yet those belt and braces have held the trousers up for so long, they got shiny, and the arse has literally fallen out of that whole project. Surely a little bit chipping away that can, and maybe be able to recover, because it's criminal activity, they might even be able to recover assets from these
Mhm.
thieves would actually go a whole lot way to improving not only the action against scammers, but also increasing the confidence of the consumer within an area that has been completely undermined by regulation in the last generation.
Yeah, I can only say I totally agree, and that's been something PSIG has been pushing for a long time, but all you get is we don't have enough resources and we've got too many other things to do, and I don't disagree with that, but the amount of money, if we look at fraud altogether, the latest report that I got from government sources is 200 billion a year being lost. Now 200 billion is more than we spend on the NHS, so we need agencies to be well equipped to be able to deal with it and not just experimenting, which I think they do. They take cases where they think they've got a chance of winning, and in a sense, you could say no pain, no gain. If you don't take a chance, you're never going to get the message out that we really mean business, and we want to go after people who, steal and defraud. But it's just a constant. We don't have enough resources, and we want to make sure we do the right thing. So we talk about it forever, and we need to get over that. We really need to become an action sort of group, if you like, rather than just somebody who'll talk about, the art of the impossible sometimes. And you're right on Dashboard. It's a real shame, and I think it is symptomatic of we want everything to be perfect before we take a chance and before we go out with anything and learn. We prefer to wait until every new developing possible issue has been explored, so you just never ever get there. And I started working on Dashboard in 2015, and that's nearly 10 years ago. And at that point, we showed that it could be done. It needed a bit of will, but it could be done. And the industry really leapt forward at that point to build modelers, to build platforms, just to show that it could actually work. But here we are 10 years later, still talking about we must get the maps version up first before we actually get commercial dashboards, and I'm coming to the conclusion that that really is the wrong way around, and we should go for commercial dashboards and learn. But it's a hard thing. We're making it hard all the time by, and we'll talk later probably about some of the other things that are coming up, and we've got this uncanny knack of coming up with a good idea and then killing it by being too complicated, trying to dot every I and cross every T. So we need a bit more of a sandbox approach than the one we have at the moment. We really truly stifle innovation, and I think that's not the role of a regulator, of any regulator, actually.
Yeah. Okay. Margaret, I'm going to just ask a question as well, which is, do you think therefore Dashboard is only going to fuel the fire on scams?
No.
It's just going to raise awareness to more and more people, or you don't think so? You think
I
it's
think
going to
scammers
defend
know,
people better?
yeah, I think scammers know pretty well how to access people, how to get information on wealth and money and where it is. It's actually quite easy to do, and I don't mean you need to go on the dark web and deal with the ultimate criminal to get information. There's a lot of information available publicly that teach you how to do some of these scamming things, and we don't close that down. But no, I don't think Dashboard is a bigger threat than anything else. I think there are more upsides to a dashboard. than there are downsides. And again, you know, commercial enterprises are going to, you know, make sure that their security is good enough, because they don't want their customers to, you know, suffer as a result of a dashboard. But you know, we're looking at a dashboard that's going to look at pensions only. And I think the world has moved beyond pensions into overall wealth, overall financial health, including debt and how to get out of trouble. And you know, there are lots of commercial opportunities out there to actually help people understand their finances and not have pensions look as some exceptional thing. You know, we tend to think it's just too difficult and it's too clever for the ordinary person. And honestly, I would quite like it to be nice and simple, but I'd like it to be part of an overall sort of wealth, health.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. I mean, Martin has very kindly put in there that he's been involved with a couple of non-pension scams, and hopefully he got close, but not all the way. That's most likely to be a banking scam. But you think that actually this is much bigger because of what you just said. ISAs, GIAs, pensions, bank accounts is part of a bigger, you know, problem.
Yeah, it is,
so,
and we just keep segmenting things, and that leaves points of exposure for people, I think. But yeah, it's a bit of a problem. But I don't think government, particularly when it's in, you know, trying to save money, you know, where we've had austerity, we've not really built the central tools to help and to stop this happening, which is a real shame, because it's a fantastic industry, and it'll you know, be a considerable source of future wealth for a lot of people. But we seem to have moved away from, you know, the wealth for people into the wealth for the UK, and trying to grow the economy. That now seems to be the number one priority, when we've got lots of big questions to ask about pensions generally, but also, you know, questions about the state pension and about benefits. So, you know, I would quite like to see a proper pensions review that looks more broadly at how people live in later life. And you know, again, we're looking on the pensions review that we're segmenting it, we're putting it into, you know, little tranches of things we'll look at, and we'll probably that way end up with a camel. So we'll wait and see what happens there.
yeah. And last question on scamming then, magic wands, what could you change with your magic wand?
I would change the enforcement end, because I think the industry has stepped up very well to the plate in terms of trying to prevent and trying to stop people being scammed. We haven't got it right yet, but I think the industry effort is excellent. It's really good. Where we're let down is by the scammers getting away with it all the time, and as long as they get away with it, they'll just continue. So we'll continue having to put a lot of effort into prevention, with no end in sight. So if I had a magic wand, I would opt for zero tolerance and resourcing up to go after the scammers wherever they are in the world, which means stopping sort of the isolationism and collaborating with other countries to capture assets of bad actors.
Okay, JQ, you got your hand up.
Good
Any
morning,
bright ideas?
Well, I mean, the issue with ideas is always the best thing to do is to listen to the people who are in the chairs, to understand what the real issues are, rather than shout from afar. But I'm still going to shout from afar. I mean, you said don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, Margaret, to do with QOps. The people I've seen involved with QOps have been at best tricksy. And so, I mean, I don't know if I've ever met a decent advisor involved in QOps. I'm sure there are, but it must be on the fingers of one hand. I don't know why we just don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, full stop with those for the start. And secondly, the point you make about enforcement is certainly most psychological studies would say the chance of getting caught is more important than the punishment. And do you think there would ever be this? But this is a stupid idea, maybe the idea of the industry getting together to fund civil actions against scammers and funding it. I mean, because the duty of as we all know, in a criminal case, it's 95% probability-ish, reasonable doubt, where in civil it's 50-50.
Yeah, and I think those are excellent points. And yes, I was trying to be kind to the industry and saying don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because there are good practitioners.
Okay, you've met them.
And I meet some, so I know that they're actually decent folks. But yeah, I mean, QROPs, you could argue, you know, well, what is the point of a QROP, and you know, is it even the definition a fair one? So even we could talk for ages on that. But yeah, I'd rather, you know, to be honest, I'd rather the baby was thrown out than we end up, you know, drowning in the bathwater. But
yep.
But yeah, I just wanted to make a point that it's not all bad, and that's why it's hard to police. In terms of civil cases, yeah, it would be an interesting way to deal with it. You know, scams themselves have a lower bar of proof, so you know, scams are not seen as criminal activity.
I didn't know that. Okay.
It's one of those weird things, but you know, there are different sort of proof levels, as you sort of alluded to yourself. But if you call something a scam, it's seen as a civil matter. It's not seen as a criminal matter. And if something is fraud, then it's criminal. So, you know, what we need to do is kind of fix where we think deception involved in stealing people's pension savings, is that criminal or is it civil? And if it's criminal, then, you know, we should, as a rule, prosecute, or at least threaten to prosecute. But the first thing we need to do is find them. And we need to know what people are up to, and we don't actually have the resources to do that. I mean, if you know, dealing with financial fraud, you've got, you know, 3 people sitting in the National Crime Agency, and their responsibility is to look at all financial fraud and crime. You know, they just don't have the bandwidth, and if those are sort of retired ex-police people, then they get out of touch fairly quickly with what's going on. So we do need to resource it, and that means the industry will need to resource it.
Thank you.
But for the industry to resource it, you know, we need to have a thriving industry that's able to do that.
Thank you. You proved there's a good reason for not throwing from afar, because I didn't know there was a different level of burden of proof. So thank you.
Yeah.
Margaret, just for a bit of homework for anybody who's interested, I've just put in the chat, what would 1 basis point mean in pounds for the whole industry? So all occupational, all contract-based, all SIP providers, 1 basis point as a scam levy. Do we know what that would add up to? Has anybody got, firing from the hip, anybody got an idea what 1 basis point would mean in pounds? How big is the industry, JQ? Any idea?
It depends on whether you're talking about the industry, i.e. the players in the industry,
it'd be an enormous amount of money.
Pension schemes.
Yeah, if it was GIAs and the lot, it would be over $1 trillion. So, I mean, well over $1 trillion. So you'd be looking at an enormous amount of money there, Steve. 1 basis point.
Yeah,
that's good.
Yeah.
Great.
No, you wouldn't need one. The point is, you wouldn't need 1 basis point. It would be a tiny amount that relative to that you'd need.
Yeah, well, we do actually have an economic fraud levy already, and you know, so people get fed up with levies, but I think if it's pretty clear what the money would be used for, then it makes it, you know, easier to justify and to absorb. So yeah, I think that's quite a good idea actually. Okay. Maybe there's some legs in there.
Scam levy. Let's get it out there. Peter, you got your hand raised. Have you got a number for me, Peter, or have you got another different question?
No, it's sort of slightly connected with that. However the funds are raised, I wondered whether there was perhaps, just off the top of my head, an opportunity to have a sort of US Western style bounty hunter in the funding one, and say that they would get a success fee on the successful conviction of the fraudster.
Brilliant idea.
I love it. I think
Brilliant idea.
that's a terrific idea. I think the bounty hunter is actually probably supposed to be the NCA or whatever. But yeah, I fancy a kind of Robocop or something going around and putting the frighteners on a lot of the scammers. But yeah, no, the one problem is finding them. And a second problem is getting access to their assets. And I think I think at the end of the day, it's the capturing the assets that's the biggest gain, because these scammers are doing it for money. They don't mind being struck off from companies because they act illicitly anyway. So, the kind of sanctions we have against them are a bit too light, but hit them in the pocket, I think, is the way. And the US has a better approach to this, not by bounty hunters, but by the agencies in the US having a zero tolerance policy and seizing assets on suspicion, rather than waiting until there's been a court case and then they can take the assets as part of the punishment. But the Fed can actually go and seize assets, and the US has this better attitude, and it invests quite a bit of money in pursuit of scammers and fraudsters, with the result that there's a lot less. But they do have a threat of sort of capital punishment. No, I don't mean in the sense that they would hang them, but the penalties for financial fraud in the US are pretty much the same as if you shoot somebody in the street. So we're pretty soft on scammers now. So yeah, I do like the bounty hunter idea.
Brilliant. Martin, you got a hand raised. We need to move on to tax treatment, but we'll come back. Martin, let's come back to that.
Yeah,
Martin,
just
what's
quick.
your question? Yeah.
No, it was just to say that I think there's been some studies which show that if people have been a victim once, they're likely to be a victim again, and having somebody offer to help you recover your money would be an obvious way to scam someone a second time. So I think we have to be very wary about that bounty hunters idea.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. There is a lot of secondary scamming, and there is a list available of people who've been scammed, so that they can then be targeted again. And there are some pretty public people who claim that they'll get back assets for a fee. And honestly, they're dangerous people, and I think they should be put out of business. But again, we're a bit too scared to call them out, so we let them carry on taking thousands of pounds from victims of scams. But yeah, there's a lot could be done. It's probably a topic for several days of discussion. But yeah, government is beginning to get it. They have appointed a fraud minister, and that was something PSIG was calling for a long time. Unfortunately, he's a bit like the Scarlet Pimpernel. I know his name, but I can't find him. So, at least they're thinking. Sorry?
Perhaps he doesn't exist.
Oh, he does. He just doesn't like to respond to communications. Maybe he doesn't know he's been given that job.
Brilliant. Oh well, that's sad, but there we go. Okay, so we move on a little bit to your campaign for tax treatment of victims, because I think not only are people being scammed, but then they're being hit even when they are scammed. So what's your view on that, Margaret?
Yeah, I think it's egregious, and I think the problem is we've got a sort of mismatch between tax law and real life. And you know, I don't have a problem with people who break tax rules, you know, being punished for it, and you know, being charged tax or penalties. I don't have an inherent problem with that. But where I have a problem is when the same applies to people who've been deceived. People have been scammed into doing something that turns out to be unauthorised, but they didn't know any better because they're just ordinary people. And we've got cases where FCA regulated advisors have persuaded people to transfer into pension liberation schemes. And the most effort of the government goes into the taxing of those victims. We don't go after the criminals, but we tax the victims, and it's relentless. And interest has been gathering up on those charges because people, you might say foolishly, but it shows that they were actually quite honest, put on their tax returns that they'd received a cash sum from what turned out to be an unauthorised scheme. So they set themselves up for the revenue to find them, and the revenue hasn't been able to calculate how much people owe. So they've been putting in protective claims for 10 years, and with interest adding up, those liabilities have virtually doubled. So that where people owed 20,000, they now owe 40,000. So trying to get a change in the law that says if deceit by a third party is the reason for somebody losing their savings, but also, you know, breaking the tax rules, then those payments shouldn't be treated as unauthorised. So in other words, looking for forgiveness for historical cases where tax is being levied. And when I started looking at this in 2019, the cost to the government of making a change to the law for historical victims would have been around 20 to 30 million. And it's now 40 plus million because of interest. So given that's pocket money for government, I think they should, you know, forgive those victims and, you know, basically let them be more economically active. Because when you're suffering severe mental anxiety, marriage breakup, bankruptcy, it's not very good for the economy to have, you know, a number of people in that situation. I'm dealing with the pension side. The same behaviours happen on investment. And you know, it's an absolute outrage. So I've launched a petition to get government to get HMRC to change their behaviour. They behave badly as well as ask for the tax, but because they do send in bailiffs to repossess people's properties. So I would like them to, I'd like Parliament to stop them doing that. They're not minded to do it. So I raised a petition, and I would be very grateful if everybody here would sign that petition, and even better if you could get your mates in the industry to sign. It's been out for just over a week now, and I've got about 1,000 signatures. I need 10,000. I've already got thousands and thousands of people liking it on social media, but liking something doesn't translate into a signature on a you know, on a campaign petition. So please encourage people to sign. It doesn't cost you anything, but we need every device to get you know, the government to get HMRC off the backs of victims and stop blaming them. There's a lot more needs to be done. But that's just one little bit of focus. And the letters, I've seen letters this morning. Well, I saw a couple of letters a couple of weeks ago that have gone out to people, and working with HMRC, who have a programme now in place to go out with final demands for all of the those victims of scams. And it's totally unrelenting. The only concession they'll give is we'll give you time to pay. And, you know, if you can't afford it, we won't take any more than 50% of your net income. So people are going to be paying this over years. And honestly, there are people who are on suicide watch because of this. So we as an industry need to step up and say, you know, this kind of behaviour is not fit for today. These people aren't tax cheats. They have been cheated. So give them a break, but also crack down on scammers.
Treat them fairly. Okay, Margaret, can you maybe offline send me the link?
Will do.
You know, we've got about 1,800 members on Playpen. We'll send it out to all 1,800. See if we can get signatures, and I'm sure a lot of the people on today's call will gladly help.
Yeah, no, that would be great.
It sounds like a travesty that you're stuffed and lose money, and you're paying tax by this. That's crazy.
No, it's crazy. And, you know, just as a bit of background, the US Treasury gives victims of financial scams, gives them, you know, tax relief, so that they can then work and recover without having to pay tax until they can get themselves back on the feet. And I think that's a modern approach to, you know, what in the States was a big problem because we had Bernie Madoff, you know, going back quite a long time ago. But, you know, the Americans learned a lesson. What, of course, the Americans will do now, I don't know, you know, the game's afoot, you know, once we get into January, but they're showing a good example at the moment.
So that's a polar opposite to the way that the UK is moving.
Totally.
They actually give tax relief and help the UK government tax and take action.
Yeah,
so,
you got it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well,
they're not really on our side.
Yeah. That's really sad, and I'm sure everybody, if they want to, will sign up, including me. Okay. Let's move on. Update on your view on VFM, value for money. So what is the update from Margaret Snowdon land on that?
I like value for money. I think it's absolutely essential that, you know, people who are putting, you know, part of their pay into a pension get good value for that. I think the government ought to get good value for giving tax relief to put into pensions. So value for money is a no-brainer. We really need to do something. But, you know, for contract-based schemes, we set up IGCs whose job was to monitor and look at value for money. Now, they were, and I was one of the first IGC members, and it was like walking into a big empty room and say, well, your job is now value for money. FCA said, well, we're not going to tell you what value for money is, it's up to you to work it out. And that was great. I worked with Phoenix, one of the biggest providers, and created a value for money measure, which counted in, you know, service, customer satisfaction, cost, investment returns, and did a really good, I thought, report. And FCA came down and is like a ton of bricks and said, after 2 years, that's not the answer. The answer is capping of charges. And if you're not capping charges, then you're not getting value for money. And that's persisted until now. Suddenly we've seen the light. So now we're saying, and now the FCA is saying, it's not actually about just cost. It's actually about sort of longer term outlooks. It's about investment for good returns. It's about flexibility, and it's about service. So I think, well, that's another 10 years lost in trying to get to this point. But so I think it's good. It's excellent in principle. It focuses purely on DC. And it looks at auto enrolment, it looks at legacy schemes, it looks at group SIPs, and it also looks at with profit. It's contract and trust but it's where an employer is involved in selecting either the provider or the default strategy. But we've got 16 million people saving into DC funds. I think they deserve value for money. 90% of those people are in defaults, so we need to make sure that the default is right and it's fit. I have a sneaky feeling that some of the value for money is as much about investment as it is about what members ultimately get. So there could be a little bit of an ulterior motive, but I think it's right. And as I say, it's what one IGC tried to do some time ago. I think it's got the potential to be very complicated, you know, and reading the papers on it, the consultation's closed, but reading the papers on it, you know, they're going for a single reporting date, which is fine, and that's kind of a lesson learned from Australia, where you have like Super Day, so that's fine. But implementing that when you've got multiple sort of contract dates, renewal dates, etc., is going to be quite difficult. And they're coming out. I mean, talk about making it difficult, but they're coming out with things like geometric averaging of monthly returns. Maybe if you're an actuary, you understand that, but you don't really need actuaries for DC schemes. It's all to be risk adjusted. It's going to be backward looking. You're not allowed projections, even though we're trying to get dashboards out that give projections. Chain linking, so that you can fairly compare new joiners and changes in investment. Smoothing, which is, you know, in the insurance sector, where you smooth out bonuses so that it looks even over the years, that will be excluded. It will include guarantees, so guarantees will form part of value for money, but strangely it excludes transaction costs. So I think when you're looking at what does the scheme cost, if you take out all the transaction costs, then where does all the cost look as if it lies? It looks as if it lies in service. And we've had a massive race to the bottom on cost, and I think we'll see something similar. But as I say, I think it's a great idea. I'll be interested to see how it comes out in practice, but I think we've just got this annoying habit of making everything hard to do. Because we try to, as I say, dot every I, cross every T, deal with every possible eventuality and risk. So we're probably in danger of making a good thing a bit of a headache. But I do like the idea of being able to compare and contrast. It's interesting that if you have an amber rating, you've got 2 years to sort things out, but you would immediately have to close to new business, and that could cause a problem for some trusts, master trusts, who you know, perhaps aren't quite to scale. So if you combine that with, you know, the mega funds proposal, we've got quite a lot of change coming up.
So that could be a massive headache for an auto enrolment scheme. If a letter comes through and says, sorry, we're amber, we can't take your business or new business, what does an employer do? Exactly.
You know, they've got 2 years to sort it out, but any master trust that goes into amber will be, you know, quaking in their boots, actually. So does that mean we'll become a bit more forgiving in the assessment of amber? I don't know, all to play for. So we'll see what comes out. But as I say, good in principle, and I think it's about time we were able to compare. But you know, it's just going to be horrendously complicated, and I'm not sure what it's actually going to do for eventual outcomes. If you spend a lot of money, you know, just trying to measure yourself all the time, you know, there's less money available for Joe Blogs at the end of the day.
This sounds very similar to your first point, which was talking about coming up with good ideas and innovation, and then we as an industry / regulators complicate the whole process and make it really hard for everybody to comply.
I know. That's the theme of, I think, everything I'm talking about this morning. It's we have good intentions and it all sounds absolutely great, but it grinds to a halt because we keep looking at what could go wrong.
Risk. So it's risk based, you think?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. JQ, you got your hand up.
Yeah, the concept of amber is a flawed concept. If going along with it means that they have to shut to new business, because the difficulty will be that entity will lose their clients and staff so quickly they're guaranteed to go red.
Yeah.
So you might as well go red straight to. I mean, I might as well sort of go from green straight to red, because they're not going to retain staff. Not going to retain clients, and it will be a mad rush out the door. It'll be like the scene from Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels, where the two fellas are trying to get in the car together.
Yeah,
it's just going to be a shocker.
Totally agree, and that's why I kind of rail against some of these spurious measures. I do agree that standards ought to be better, but sure. Naming and shaming isn't usually a positive thing to do. But it'll be interesting to see how it actually comes out, and I hope that plenty of responses that went into the consultation points that out. I'm sure all the master trusts would have pointed that out.
Yeah,
it's a good point though, JQ, because put it in Jane Austen territory. Good opinion once lost is a failing. I mean, that's going to happen, isn't it? If you're a shareholder, a CEO, an FD, an HR manager, and you go, "What, they've gone amber? Oh, that's a pain in the neck." You're never going to go back. You're going to lose trust and faith in amber. So what is the point?
Yeah, no, totally agree with that.
Wow. Okay, conscious of the time. So next on the agenda is what is happening with retirement planning and guidance. I'm sure Philip. Well, no, he is here, but anyway,
he's disappeared. He's disappeared. Well, I'm just going to point out that there's a desperate need for people to understand what it is they've got and what they're going to need. And we've had the FCA for the last few years looking at the advice guidance boundary review, and I must admit we just seem to again be kind of tinkering with definitions. At the end of the day, people need support and they need help. They don't all need fully regulated financial advice to do anything, and simplified advice as an option isn't particularly popular because it comes with quite a lot of risk without possibly adding a lot of value to the individual. But they're now chewing on targeted support, which could be quite interesting. It's going to give people like me comparisons to people. So typically, people like you would, have debt of this level and would invest this amount in a pension, etc. And I don't think you need IFAs to be able to deliver that. I think there are, better ways to do it. And I think it's something that I would, and for quite a long time, I've promoted the idea of administrators who talk to members on a daily basis, being the ones to do the helping and the guiding. They don't do it. Trustees are afraid of it because, they don't want to come a cropper. When the FCA tells them, by helping people, you've actually crossed that boundary into advice and then you've acted in an unregulated manner. I think we need to get over a lot of that. People just need help to not make silly decisions, to think more broadly about their whole circumstances, what they need and what they want, and we shouldn't be overly precious. People make decisions every day about things, and we don't fret. We don't say, "Oh, you can't go and buy a TV because you don't know enough, and you need an expert to go through all the nuts and bolts of it." So what's kind of happening is that alongside that, the Consumer Duty Alliance has launched a retirement income task force, which I just happen to chair. And that's an industry group, and it's actually looking at ways to help people on the ground in a practical way, help people to understand the need for planning for later life and not leaving it until the age of 55 or even later. And we're about to publish a short primer, which we're hoping that employers will send out to people, sort of approaching retirement, say from age 50. Just reminding them of things that they would need to consider, things to think about. And we're also working on guidance on what a good standard of guidance would look like. So there's quite a bit to come, but it's the industry saying we want our customers to be as well prepared as we can be. We want to help consumers to know what good looks like, because a lot of bad actors out there, link into the scamming side. So we want to try and help people identify a good advisor, help employers to identify a good advisor or guidance, and also where to get it. And that introduces a sort of accreditation scheme for guiders who say they'll sign up to the principles of the retirement income, principles, that will sign up to those. So we just maintain that there isn't so much an advice gap. We hear about this all the time, that there's an advice gap. There isn't. People who are wealthy know full well where to get financial advice. People don't always need that. What they need is to be aware of what else is available to them, what the implications are, what they get compensation for if it goes wrong, that type of support. And also emphasize that it's actually quite okay to look for a bit of help in what you're trying to do for your retirement. It shouldn't be something that's expensive, hard to get. It should be more freely available. And after all, when we look at pension freedoms, when they came in, George Osborne said that there would be free guidance for all. Well, that he disappeared within days, I think, of that announcement.
Yeah.
So that was my little plug for the Retirement Income Task Force.
Oh, well done you. Podrick, you got your hand up. Any thoughts or questions or?
Yeah, Margaret, I take your point about there isn't an advice gap, but actually perception is reality. There's a perceived gap because for the last 25 years, the regulator has refused consistently to draw a line in the sand between what it considers is advice and what the rest is, which is not going to be regulated or may fall within certain levels of regulation. It has failed to do that. It's, and it's had multiple opportunities. And some of that is partly what's caused, despite the fact lots of money's still gone into it, the kind of the tainting of the SIP market, so that it's only those that really know what's going on are going to be able to take advantage of that. But also it can't be trusted to direct people towards advisors, because the British Steel debacle is largely down to the FCA refusing to get involved in regulating in that part of the market. It stood back and watched Rome burn. And so I don't trust FCA anyway. I didn't think it would be any good from when it took over from FSA, and it just constantly proves that it can't find its backside with two hands. So while I think it's encouraging, you say that some of these things are good, and that it's a bit of a curate's egg, or in my vernacular, more of a bugger's muddle, and that's why we never get anywhere. We take two steps forward and one back. Sorry, I'm off my soapbox now.
Yeah, no, I like people on soapboxes. It shows a bit of passion and interest, and I think you're right. I would actually sort of question fundamentally whether we need to regulators, whether we need a mammoth regulator who doesn't seem to move. You know, I think we've got a lot of questions, but meantime, people do need some help from people who have got their best interests at heart, and, you know, can impartially tell people, and I don't think that's MAPS, but I think it's people who do actually understand what the options are and what the options mean, and can explain it in words that actually mean something to individuals. But you're so right. You know, this, you know, boundary that's, you know, well, the first report came out in 2023, and we still haven't decided what that boundary is. I think it's quite simple. I think if somebody's a regulated, paid up financial advisor, then no matter what they do, it's regulated financial advice. But if other bodies, you know, give guidance, in varying degrees of sophistication, I think that could never be deemed as regulated financial advice. You know, that's a nice simple way to do it, and then we could have effort spent making sure that the people who are delivering the guidance are actually, you know, good enough to do that. And there is a qualification with PMI which actually helps people to demonstrate that they're able to do that. But yeah, it's like plodding through treacle sometimes, you know, trying to get change when I think there are too many vested interests.
Okay, Margaret, thank you for that. Gareth, you got your hand up. Any comment on this? Is one of your pet loves or pet hates? I don't know which way around you want me to say, but
yeah, I mean, Margaret, if you like people with a soapbox, I'm about to make your day, I think.
Excellent.
Go for it, Gareth.
First of all, yes, there is an advice gap. There's a huge advice gap. I mean, I spent 40 years working in advice, not financial advice, not regulated advice, but real advice, if you like. And it infuriates me that kind of financial services people claim the word advice for themselves, and they say that nothing else can count as advice. There has been an enormous amount of advice services, sadly sort of withering because of financial problems for decades now, that have tried to help people with problems. And the kind of problems that those people face are not the kind of problems that people go to financial advisors about. And I think you have to remember there's a tiny minority of people who go to financial advisors. There's a group of people who go to things like Citizens Advice and Advice UK and generalist advice services. And there's an enormous group of people in the middle who don't go to either. They don't have the resources or, in a sense, the needs for sophisticated financial advice. They don't see themselves as customers of kind of Citizens Advice and those sort of agencies. So they sit there in the middle without access to much advice at all. And they sit there very often with financial problems. They sit there with quite low incomes, even though working full time. They sit there with probably very small amounts of pension savings, many of them. But if you look at the median amount of pension savings according to the ONS, it's what, £35,000 last figure I saw, something like that, which means that there are millions and millions of people with less than that amount of money, and a much smaller number of people with more than that amount of money. I put in a tediously large response to the advice guidance review, because when I read it, I just couldn't believe it, where it said, we're not going to suggest that people are allowed to do this simplified advice on decumulation, because it's too complicated when you start talking about pensions and benefits together. Yes, it is complicated, but there are tools that do those kind of sums. And just through the sweep of a pen, removing that kind of access to even a little bit more advice from people just struck me as being absolutely outrageous. Mm-hmm. What really I guess, and you mentioned the Consumer Duty Alliance. I went to that session in the motorcycle museum, and again it's really kind of focusing on that kind of privileged few. What we haven't seen any proposals for is a way of kind of bringing both the expertise and the resources of those two different groups of advisors together, so they could meet somewhere in the middle and start providing some kind of service to that real unmet need. I mean, we've just we're waiting for the result of a tender that's gone in, where we're talking about using technology to allow people coming up to retirement age to kind of forecast where they're likely to be in terms of things like loss of earnings and increases in state benefits, increases in state pensions, and so forth. The technology is there to do those kind of quite sophisticated sums to allow for planning. I mean, in terms of the state benefits bit, how you take your pension can have an enormous effect on your income, simply because of whether, if you take it down as drawdown, for example, it gets treated as capital, which is much more generously treated by state benefits. If you take it as an annuity or anything regular, it's treated as income and just comes off penny for penny. But there's nobody out there telling people that. I haven't seen a pension company that actually does anything other than refer you on with a checkbox and say you should go and seek advice on this, and crudely, because we're not interested. There's no money in it for us. So that's I'll cut the rant to there. That's the 5-minute version. I can give you the 4-day one if you want.
Excellent. I think we might have to meet up for a coffee and discuss it. Yeah, I mean, I'll take the point. I probably used too loose language on advice gap. That, you know, there is a gap. There's absolutely no question. And you know, what I'm trying to do with the Retirement Income Task Force is to recognise that there's a lot of people out there who need some help, and they're not getting it. And you know, all of these reviews don't actually deliver help to the ordinary man in the street. Our target is the ordinary man in the street who has a job. Initially, who has a job, and get the employers to, you know, do something to help make people aware of, you know, the value of having a little bit of help on things and where they can get it without, you know, people, you know, being critical of them or sniffy or charge them a lot of money. But we're on the early part of the journey. And you know, I do agree with what you're saying.
Cool. Thank you very much indeed, Margaret. Slightly overrun. We haven't talked to you about mega funds. Do you want to give a 30-second appraisal of mega funds, Rachel Reeves' mega funds idea?
Yes, I mean, just a couple of minutes actually. Great idea in principle. I like consolidation, always had. But it's got to be consolidation for a purpose. I worry a little bit about the purpose of the mega funds being purely to invest in UK growth. That's not the purpose of a pension scheme. It would be good if investment in the UK resulted in better outcomes for members. That's not guaranteed, but you know, it's kind of pointed at multi-employer DC schemes, i.e. master trusts, and we've got issues like what happens if a master trust isn't big enough, and they're looking at 25 billion or maybe 50 billion, a fair old range, as something that's viable. Lots of master trusts aren't there. We've already consolidated a good number of master trusts, but you know, I think again we're going to make it very complicated. But the short thing I'd say is, two bad master trusts merging to be bigger isn't necessarily creating a good master trust. We've got value for money. We've got to try and put a lot of things into the melting pot, and I think it's just going to be an enormous challenge. But I just worry about the motives and where that stacks up in law, actually, you know, with things like transfers without consent, And there could be winners and losers. What happens to all the service providers? Do they have to end up on the dole? It's just not properly thought through, and we've got until 2030 to think it through, except if you're in a local government scheme, you've got until 2026, but that's purely mega in terms of investment. But as usual, there'll be so much regulation of those Super 8 or Mega 8 or whatever that it'll end up being quite expensive, I think, and there's a risk that UK investments don't perform, and there's a risk that we won't even know what a UK investment is. So there's quite a lot of stuff to work out on the mega funds.
Okay, fantastic. I appreciate that, Margaret. Thank you very much today for your very informative session. I think everybody will join me in thanking you for your time and your input. It was really interesting. Please send me the link for your petition. I think everybody will be keen to have a look at that. So that's a fantastic session. We'll get the video and podcast up later on today, Margaret. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay. Thanks,
so
everyone.
Superb, and wish everybody well for the rest of the day. I will keep you all posted about Henry. We all wish him well for a speedy recovery. And yeah, we'll pray for peace in the East, peace in the Middle East, and hopefully he'll come out fighting, as they say. Next week we've got Harris Ray, who is chair of the APPT, talking about trustees and trustee issues and the world of trusteeship. So hopefully you can join us for that. But Margaret, thank you very much for a fantastic session. Let's hope we can get some signatures on your petition. And good luck with your campaign. So really, really fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers, everyone.
Take care. Cheers.
Thanks,
Bye.
Margaret. Well done.
Well done. Well done. Thank you.